Yeah, high five. Delfiner, pingviner, whatever you want.
So, you got the clicker, perfect. Now it's time for today's final presentation. Adarsh will be presenting. And it's the same people that were in this last presentation, so now I don't have to let you know about the timings, but in 25 minutes I'll let you know 25 minutes have passed. So the stage is yours.
Welcome everyone for the final presentation. Okay. There's some update here.
Ah, that was an story.
So we had a great presentation from Nikhil and Vijay, and I could relate quite a lot of topics from their presentation as well. And they mentioned about the private car ownership. So the increase in the car use definitely puts pressure on the parking system, but often the parking system is usually neglected. They mostly concentrate on providing alternative mobility services in order to reduce the car ownership. But here in my thesis, have chosen parking uh, as a solution to reduce the car ownership and provide a sustainable transportation solution. So here the concept is shared parking, which I can say has parking as a service in other terms, and it's been integrated with public transportation. So I'm going to go with aim, research question, background, theory, methodology, results, conclusion, and future scope in the presentation. So one of the aim is to provide a basis for a sustainable business model because the shared parking is a relatively new concept and there's no much literature or research on this particular topic. So I thought this thesis could provide a basis to develop a business model and also stimulate the stakeholder engagement to reduce car use. Therefore, the research question is how can the concept of shared parking and public transportation can fulfill the travel needs. So, in order to propose a new solution, it's definitely important to understand the travel needs. So that's what the first question is about, and the second question is about how does the key stakeholders react to the new concept. And let's go through some of the transportation stats. And here we can see that there is increase in car growth, and around 92% is about diesel cars, and 79% is privately owned, which shows the amount of private car ownership. And from 2014, we can see the continuous rise in car ownership in Sweden. And this is an interesting graph. It shows the congestion level in Gothenburg. From here, I can say it's around 23%. According to them, for a person to travel to their destination, it takes around 25 to 30 minutes on an average of extra time based on this graph. So, uh, in order to reduce car ownership, I have taken a shared parking approach. As we all know, parking in recent years, parking has been used as a tool to reduce car ownership. Even in Gothenburg and throughout Sweden, parking spaces has been reduced, so they can force the public to use public transportation. But from the graphs, from the previous presentation, from the previous slide, we can see that there's continuous rise in the car use, but there is slightly decrease in parking spaces. So there's mismatch in that. So therefore, I propose efficient utilization of existing parking space. So here I say that by sharing the residential parking space, which is often not allowed for the public, we can utilize the idle parking space much efficiently, therefore reduce the burden for the public or the municipality to build new parking spaces. And here I can say that the parking norms of Gothenburg, they suggest that in future, the inner city will have just zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.5 parking space per apartment. So the strategy is to reduce the parking spaces in future in the city, but the car growth is still rising. There's no strategies for that. And building of new parking spaces is also harmful for the environment, which emits around 70 kg of carbon dioxide. Uh, so we need to think about how to reduce building new parking spaces. The reason why I'm integrating this with public transportation is to promote the use of public transportation. And in that stat, we can say that in Stockholm, around 365 boardings are done by one person in a year, but in Gothenburg, it's just 186. So there's a need to promote public transportation as well. So this is the integration. And in the process of analyzing this new concept, I use multi-level perspective theory and backcasting. I guess already everyone knows about this concept, as the previous presentation also spoke about this. So here in the backcasting approach, the vision is to attain the transportation goals of Gothenburg. Uh, so attain the transportation goals in the future. But how do we do that? So from using multi-level perspectives, I analyze the existing system, which is nothing but the socio-technical regime, which is locked in by a network of actors, industrial practices, traditional business models, infrastructure, and social and other regulations. So in this process, there is a lot of landscape pressure, which is like urbanization, climate change, which is driving the change, but the regime is completely resisting to that change. But we have a lot of niche ideas, which is again resisted by the regime. So it's important to analyze what is the regime here. So in my thesis, the regime is private car ownership, parking, and public transportation. Um, the business models of existing car manufacturers, they they promote the marketing of their cars, selling of their cars, which is nothing but increasing private car ownership. And also the public transportation, they are locked into the practice of providing transportation only to certain dense areas. The suburban areas lack frequencies, and even the price models of public transportation is not flexible throughout the day, irrespective of the demand. uh, the price model remains same. It is not flexible, which is as in case of mobility services, which varies according to the demand. And parking system, the traditional method of providing parking is following minimum parking requirements, and uh, that has taken a lot of land in the city. And even the residential buildings, they are bound to build certain number of parking spaces, whether the tenants use it or not. They have to build certain number of spaces. For example, if a building has 100 apartments, they have to build 70 parking spaces, and it doesn't matter whether the tenants are uh, going to use that or whether they are going to use public transportation, and there are no measures to regulate the parking spaces built in the buildings. Uh, and these are the methodology I'm going to follow. I followed in my thesis. So in order to propose a new mobility service, it is necessary to provide a basis for sustainable business model. And here I'm going to use value proposition canvas, which is the core of a business model. And I'm going to explain about that in the next slide. And the data collection process involves literature review, questionnaire, and semi-structured interviews. And all the data collected from these three processes are presented in the dialogue session. And in the dialogue session, with the presence of 7 to 8 stakeholders, they analyzed the concept of shared parking and public transportation with the use of SWOT analysis. And that I'm going to present in the next slide. So the next slide is about value proposition canvas. So as I said before, this is the core of the business model. This uh, portrays the value created by the concept. So here it has two profiles. One is customer profile and one is product profile. And that profile shows what are the customer needs. And the jobs are nothing but what are the tasks they are performing in order to achieve something. So here traveling from one place to another is certain job. And what gains represent what are they benefiting by doing certain jobs. So here, by traveling to workplace, they are reaching the workplace by using car or by public transportation. So that is their benefits. But in the process of doing those tasks, they face certain challenges, like for example, emissions, stress to drive in the traffic. So those are certain pains in the process of traveling. And the left side of the value proposition canvas is the product profile, and this gain creators show how the features of the product can match the expected gains which they are attaining from their certain jobs which are they're doing currently. And pain relievers, they show the feature, they show how the new product can eliminate the existing challenges of the user. And after getting all the features and the customer profile, the next step is to value fit. So the value fit shows how well the gain creators matches with the existing gains and how well the pain relievers elevates the existing pains. So in the process, it is not necessary to address all the pains and gains, but the important factor is to analyze the most important ones. And those pains, gains, and the jobs are ranked based on the data collected by the questionnaire. So the next is the results. During the questionnaire was circulated around the car users and the parking segment. So we have like two customer segment here. One is the private car users and the other one is parking users. So the demographics of the questionnaire, the data collection showed that around 70% were male and 30% were female, and most of them around 40 to 49 age group, and almost everyone, 90% were employed who answered the survey, and around 70% lived in flat or apartments, and the rest had their own houses. And this is the important factor, like 90% of them lived with their partner or with the family, which shows that the car user usually travels in a group with their own friends and family. And 43% stayed around 6 to 10 kilometers from the city center. So this shows the customer profile of private car segment, and here is the jobs. So the main purpose of using a car is to travel to the work. As I said, like 90% were employed, so it is necessary for them to reach their workplace on time. And also they answered shopping is quite important factor for them to use cars, so they can carry their belongings. And some of them even said that they go for shopping just after finishing their job. So it allows them to be flexible. And also leisure activities, like we all know that city center has like quite a lot of good restaurants and other activities. So they usually go to the center with their friends on the weekends. And in the gains, the top three are quite important: convenience, flexibility, and less travel time. So we all know that the public transportation takes some time to reach the destination, and the bus stop or the tram stop may not be close to the destination, so they have to walk quite a bit. So using car allows them to be flexible and also convenient enough to reach any place whenever they want. And also it's faster, definitely, as we all know. And since most of them lived with family and friends, it's also beneficial for them to travel together. And one aspect here, the privacy and comfort, even though that's a kind of benefit, it's been ranked a bit lower than other features. I'm going to talk about that later. So now let me talk about the pains. The most important challenges they face while traveling is traffic and congestion. Like everyone wants to travel by car and reach their destination on time. So it definitely creates traffic, and also the number of parking spaces are not good enough for the amount of cars here. So that again increases the queuing in the city. That results in traffic again. And also the more the cars, the more is the pollution. And since there's congestion tax, fuel use during the process, they said that it's expensive to travel by car, but they had no choice just to use it. And many said they dislike driving, but they had no other option. And also they said parking is really expensive in the city. Even though, and few of them even mentioned that even though it's expensive, they're going to continue using the car. And few of them said that if there is an alternative service, then they are ready to change their travel behavior. And definitely there's decrease in parking spaces, which is making it hard to find a parking space in the city. And this shows that around 75% said that they take around 5 to 10 minutes to find a parking space in the city. It's again that is results in congestion and the emissions, and this shows by spending 5 to 10 minutes, they're going to emit around 0.2 kg of CO2 if it's a diesel car, and around 0.5 kg of CO2 if it's a gasoline car. So there's necessity to reduce the timing of finding a parking space. And this shows how shared parking and the public transportation can benefit the user. So here it shows how well the features of this concept can create the similar gains what they are achieving right now using the car. So with this concept, if there is a digital application where shared parking and public transportation is combined, then uh, the car user can find the parking space easily, and if there are uh, more users, then it's easy for them to find multiple locations. And also it provides the facility to book the spot online, which makes it easier for them to reach the space without much hassle and without creating traffic. And also they can plan their timings, they can plan their travel with the navigation system which helps them reach the space. So the provider of the parking space is not necessary to meet the user face to face. And also the availability of online payment makes it easier for them to enable the transaction. Uh, and the user can also be benefited by a subscription-based model where the user can pay for the parking space either monthly, or they can just pay it once they use the parking space. So basically the aim is to provide a convenient and flexible parking space. And also additional services is definitely beneficial to attract more users. So this shows the pain relievers, how this can reduce the existing pains. So by the availability of public transportation tickets in the same application, they can plan their travel, they can stop by in one of the shared parking space and reach their destination using a public transportation ticket. So this reduces emission, traffic, as well as congestion. And also, if you said that it's expensive to travel, by by the availability of public transport, they are reducing the congestion tax and also the expenses on fuel use. So therefore, there is a decrease in the travel expenses as well. And also, the parking is definitely affordable because there is no investment from the supplier side. And also, availability of multiple parking locations makes it easier for them to find a parking space. And this shows that uh, around 53% agreed that they're going to park their car in one of the shared space if the service is available, and then reach their destination using public transportation. And around 30% they were not sure, maybe because of the lack of information, and they showed some concerns about the time required to change, and it would be complicated uh, in the process of changing the transportation mode. And this is the private car segment, and their job is to own a parking space and get the parking permit. But their main benefits is to have a parking space closer to their home, uh, which makes them feel better for their car. It's always safe, and also it provides protection from weather and thefts. But uh, the pain is it's expensive to own or buy a parking place. So they have to they have to spend money on owning or buy on or renting a parking space near their house, plus whenever they travel. So it's a double expense for them. And also they said that uh, the amount they are paying for the parking space, they feel that it's not really utilized in relation to in relation to the high price. So they feel that it's really underutilized. And there's also no payback for the parking place because it's not creating any incentive for them. It's just one-time investment. And few of them also opted for on-street parking, which they said that other drivers may occupy the space. And this pie chart shows that around 64% said that the parking space is available between 25 hours to more than up to 45 hours per week. So we can see how underutilized the existing parking spaces are. And it's a huge source. If this source is tapped, then we can reduce the demand for parking in the city. And this shows how the concept can benefit the parking segment suppliers. So for the supplier, it's easier for them to just post the facility of the parking online in the digital application. Just post their location, post their availability period, and post the prices. So this makes it easier for them, for the user to find a parking space. And even from the supplier side, they don't need to find a customer. the information they provide is good enough for them to attract the customers, and even they can post pictures and other features of the parking space. Uh, and also the online transaction makes it easier for them to uh, get the payment online, and also the additional services makes them uh, easier to maintain the parking spaces and attract new suppliers. And the notification option provides them to analyze uh, when the parking space is used, and also they can provide feedback on the user as well. One important aspect of this is the parking space is definitely always available for them because it's their home, and it provides freedom for them to reschedule their parking space even though it's been posted online once. They can cancel it and again reschedule their the parking space availability. And let's look into the pain relievers. And we all know that it's expensive and hassle to maintain, and they feel that it's underutilized. But by sharing, they can earn money, and this can quite compensate the high price that they are paying for the parking place. And also, this increases the utilization of the parking space. And this shows that around 48% of the tenants they agreed to share their parking space, which is actually a good number for the starting of this project. And around 28% said they are not sure because they were not sure about whether it's profitable or how the process works and who's going to provide the service. Uh, so let's look into this is the consolidated list of all the features of combining shared parking and public transportation. So it's like easy to find for the private car users. It's easy to find, and it's less priced than the normal parking. And there's no long queues for the parking. And even for the tenants, it's a way to earn money. And also, it's easy for them to find customers online. There's no hassle for them to look for customers. So the service provider will take care of finding the customer and also the transaction process. And the second research question was how the stakeholders going to react about this concept. So here it shows the strengths and opportunities of this concept. Uh, One of the strengths is that this could promote the use of public transportation. We all know the expansion of public transportation to suburban areas is quite expensive because of less number of travelers, and even that could turn out to be a loss for the public transportation provider. But this option uh, could possibly could possibly be a solution for the last mile problems, where the car users can just park their vehicles outside the city center and take public transportation from there. So by integrating car sharing and bike pooling services, it could further promote sustainable transportation, and this could add new customer for the public transportation, potentially from the car segment, and that's again a revenue generation for them. This is also revenue generation for the building company as well as the tenants. Uh, by so the whole process, the whole journey will reduce the amount of car use. Therefore, this reduces the congestion and emission, and by increasing the use of public transportation, that's more beneficial for the city. And as I said before, it improves the utilization of residential parking. So this thesis basically just focuses on residential parking, but inclusion of other private parking such as business centers, commercial centers would be more beneficial. And because if one car user uses this shared parking space, there is one empty uh, parking space in the city. So as the number of users increase, it substantially reduces the demand for the municipality to provide certain number of parking spaces and even to build new parking spaces. So it's definitely better to include private parking as well. Uh, and the, the the facility of on-street parking in the existing parking system is to provide short-term parking for the users, like for like half an hour or 1 hour maybe. But the existing car users they use it for a long time, and this is quite hassle for the traffic office as well as for the pedestrians and the other travelers in the city, which can cause congestion. Therefore, this shared parking could be a solution for the car users to park in one of the shared space rather than using on-street parking. because since there is no investment in the process, this would definitely be cheaper than the public parking. And for the third party users, this could be a business opportunity. And since there is no market for this, currently there is no market for this, it's an opportunity for them to create a new market. And also by collaborating public transportation, parking providers, we can create a new market in the uh, in achieving the transportation goals. Uh, Now these are the weaknesses and threats. Uh, since I said this is a new concept, therefore there are quite uncertainties as well. And the existing parking users are they are used to they are used to follow certain set of travel habits, and it's definitely hard for them to convince to share their space uh, for someone who is not known for them. And also the current parking the current residential parking system, the parking prices are subsidized and it's been distributed across all the tenants who stays in the building, irrespective of whether they use the parking space or not. So when they create revenue, it's quite difficult to distribute who's going to be responsible in getting major share of the profit, whether it's uh, yeah, whether it's a building company or the tenants. And also, the current parking system is already capitalized by public and private parking companies, so it's hard to attract new customers because the existing users already know where the parking availability is. And also, there are quite technical barriers, whether how to provide the accessibility for the shared parking space, because currently they have their own app stack, which is used by the tenants. So it's quite difficult to provide accessibility for a new user. And also for the public transportation, they said, is it viable for them to provide discounts? If they really want to provide discounts, they can provide it either way from first and from start and end of the trip, rather than waiting for a car user to reach midway and then use public transportation. So these things has to be addressed in developing the sustainable business model. And these are some of the sustainability benefits of this concept. Economically, this would increase the utilization of existing parking without creating demand for new parking spaces. And also, it's of almost zero investment, and it's a revenue source for parking company, public transportation, and the residential builders. And also socially, anyone can share the parking space irrespective of their background, and they have the freedom to reschedule their parking space even after once they're shared. So this would allow freedom of movement for the user because they can just reach into one of the shared space and get accessibility to any part of the city through public transportation. So environmental benefits are definitely, as I said before, it reduces emissions because of reduced car use, and also less congestion with less congestion. Plus, when it takes off the burden of providing new parking spaces, those land can be used for urban development for cyclists or for pedestrians. And from this I conclude that the main aspect of for travel is convenience, flexibility, and fast travel. So a new mobility service should address these factors, and for that there is a necessity of collaboration between a wide range of actors, and we need more sustainable business model in order to break the existing regime, which has the traditional business models which are quite inflexible. And also, I would like to add that John mentioned about transformation, integration, and universality uh, in process of achieving sustainable development. So here, the transformation is achieved uh, by forcing the user to shift towards public transportation from car segment to public transportation, and and here there's an integration of two different sectors, that's parking and public transportation. Plus, the process involves public directly in the process of creating a change, and also this concept is uh, this concept can be applied to any city in the globe. Uh, so this is quite a universal concept, and this is the future scope. So the development of business model, because the concept here, the thesis just provides a basis of how the concept can create value, uh, and this could also lead inclusion of new services like private parking, logistic parking, car and bike sharing in the future study, and also a pilot study would be beneficial to check the feasibility of the concept and also understand the practical problems. Uh, and also the development of digital platform, which is not included in the thesis, is also a potential future study. And also the assessment of technical aspects like automatic sharing of the parking and providing accessibility to the user is also an interesting concept to be studied in future. And thus I conclude my thus I finish my presentation with this slide. Thank you for your attention.
28 seconds. Good. Let's go for the opposition directly. And we met you this morning. So.
Yes. Oh, yeah. You have what?
Yeah, so you,
like that part out.
But you can present yourself still because we've got more people who have come this afternoon who haven't met you before.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So my name is Gabriella and this is
Marina.
Yes, so thank you for a very interesting presentation and for a very interesting work. We thought that you had conducted a very good foundation of your research and you gave a lot of good information regarding and material regarding the data collection and you have very nice results and business model but we were thinking about as you know, some of the parts weren't finished, so we couldn't really read the whole thesis comprehensible. But do you think that you would have done your research in a different way today if you can look back and see if you could have limited or done anything differently?
As I said before, it's like a new concept and there's really lack of research about this. And so I had to introduce quite a lot of concepts during the process, like sustainable business model, MLP perspectives, and value proposition canvas. So it's quite broad perspective. But yeah, if I had quite more time, I guess I could have done it much better. And also during data collection process, it took quite a lot of time to get the responses, which again delayed the results and analysis. Plus also in the process of interviews, I couldn't contact certain stakeholders because they were busy with their work. So I guess their information could have changed the results a bit. But I feel, but I feel it's a good job till now. And I could have done it much better if they had replied for my request.
No, it's really good. I mean, it's a very good foundation and a lot of good material that you have received from it. So no, the question was more that if you thought that you would have limited yourself to a narrower scope to be able to have finished.
I'm not sure if I could have narrowed my scope much further because initially it was about just private parking, but then I narrowed it to just a residential parking system. So I don't think I could narrow it much further.
More time.
Yeah.
I'd like to add up on that question. If you did have more time, for example, and didn't have as many limitations when it comes to time and being alone, for instance, would you have wanted to research anything else besides the things that you have mentioned now in the thesis? Was there anything that you wish you could have also looked at?
Yeah, there are like a couple of companies which are like already working on shared parking, but they're relatively new. So I could have added more practical perspective of how they are conducting their business because it's like almost the same concept. And probably I could have investigated more about the private parking as well because even the private parking spaces constitute quite huge amount of space in the city. So I could have added that perspective.
I can take the next one. Okay, then I want to mention some stuff when it comes to structure of the thesis. When reading the table of contents, for example, as well as all the chapters, there is some inconsistency when it comes to the red thread or the flow of the text. So, I mean, technically you should be able to have an understanding and follow the logic of the text when you go through it. But some topics didn't always make sense to us, so we have some questions about that. So the first one is, why did you choose to have the literature review as a separate chapter instead of putting it in the results? Was there some purpose with that, or was it just a choice?
No, here the primary results is uh, the data collected from the questionnaire and from the dialogue session. So the literature review, I chose to put it under theory because those are already existing and it's been kind of researched and proved by a lot of scholars. Uh, there is no much efforts from my side to find out something from that. It's just about picking important parts from the research which is already done. So I felt that it's not relevant to put that in the results, rather than use that research as a base, like as a landscape pressures, which I mentioned in the literature review, and regime, and also the niche concepts. So those are like a foundation for the thesis, and uh, and the results show that how this niche concept can pass the regime and reach the future goals.
Yes. Okay. Good. So then we will continue with asking you about the background theory, because when we started, first you start with a very narrow scope of describing your area, and then you start with this big landscape all of a sudden. Was was the purpose to do that way, or or would it? I mean, maybe better to have a broader scope and then narrow it down, or was there some purpose for having it in that way?
The intention was to introduce the concept initially, like what are the new mobility services are, or the combined mobility service perspective, and then introduce a lot of different concepts. As I said before, like the whole thesis involved MLP, business model, VPC. So for a reader, for a reader they have to understand all these concepts. So I included all this in the theory. Started with a narrow perspective of introducing what the mobility services are, and then introduce uh, these concepts.
Yeah, because it was really good information, but some feedback from us is that for a reader it would have been easier to read the bigger scope and then go down and maybe put some of the narrower scope, like from the background to the introduction, as you didn't have that part at the moment. But just some constructive feedback that would be good too, because it's easier to understand when you read.
So you could have either like a chapter called background or a chapter called theory, where you could put everything together, but just put it in a more logical order. So like Gabriela said, a broader perspective,
quite
like
broad,
general, and then you
now.
narrow it down to like, okay, now I'm actually doing this. And then a lot of information, like she said, from background can go to your introduction as well, because it was really
Yeah,
good.
like that's why the literature review is after the theory
Mm.
part, which ends with the niche concept of shared parking, and then follows with the results.
Mm. Okay, let's see. So I have just a comment here as well. When it comes to headings, they could be made into subheadings instead. That's just another comment because they are really relating to each other.
Yeah.
So, for example, when it comes to business models, you could have business models, sustainable business models, and value proposition canvas as the subheadings. For example, instead of that,
Yeah.
you did like them as the main.
Separate.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my comment on that.
And I think also that you had a really good methodology that you used. But did you intend to I mean discuss how you did the methods, or was it finished?
Like,
Because from a method data collection, you should be able to replicate. We should be able to replicate your how you did the data collection, and
Yeah.
at present it's very thin.
Like it's the data collection is directly from the car users. So in the future, like if there is more mobility services, then their way of traveling also changes, and if their purpose of travel changes, then their way of using car or using public transportation definitely changes. But right now, uh, I guess it's quite hard to replicate the exact results because it's just the reply, it's just the responses from certain group of people, but not the whole city. So it's quite hard to generalize the results now.
Mm.
But I feel it's a good base
Mm.
to take it to the next level and get the perspective of more people and then develop the concept.
Yeah, maybe just elaborate on how you did the data collection in the methodology
Yeah.
chapter.
For example,
2
you
minutes.
Okay.
have how much? Two? Yeah, for example, you have the semi-structured interviews. So, I mean, I don't know if you used an interview guide, but if you did, that would be a good thing to put into the method part. So, like everything that describes, even if it is just like, okay, I met the people, I chose them according to this criteria.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
asked
that
them
is
these
been mentioned
questions.
in the report.
But yeah, and then one really good suggestion for you, since we're running out of time, um, to have better consistency in grammar throughout your text, because we ourselves did it. We signed up for this writing session at the library. So we sat there for like 3 hours, and we sat with this guy who basically went through our chapters and helped us with the grammar, which was really useful because we had a lot of small mistakes. So it helped us make the text flow a lot. So we really recommend, because you have a lot of time left,
Yeah, look into
to
that.
go and book a few sessions,
Yeah.
because that really helps, because you become really blind to the text
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you write it yourself, especially when you're by yourself. You just go, I don't see this anymore.
Yeah,
So
because of the deadlines, I had to fill up the
Yeah.
text there.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so it was a really, really good work for one person, and you should be really proud of it. It was really good.
Thank you very much. So, thank you. Let's move into the final questions. I see 2 hands already. Pia, you get to go first.
Okay, well, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I thought it was very easy to follow and understand what you have done. A lot of the pains you mentioned were related to like finding parking space in the city or like the cost of the parking space. And I was a bit concerned that if you make it more available, like the parking space are cheaper, then that could maybe lead to like even more cars going into the city center, and then until it sort of stabilizes at the same pain level. Did you think about this like problem with?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, even I discussed about the same thing with a lot of stakeholders, but when you see a collective change, then then you can like analyze that there's a lot of people who are driving into these shared parking spaces, and also if there's a right incentives from public transportation, uh, people would definitely choose to park their space on the way and use public transportation. So in one way there is a shift towards public transportation, but uh, in some aspect it could possibly give rise to traffic in some other area, like drawing more people into these shared spaces because it's quite cheaper. So it depends on the kind of incentives the public transportation provides, and also the price range which they offer.
And did you sort of think of maybe limiting these shared parking spaces to the sort of outskirts?
Outskirts, yeah.
Or
Outskirts is better. Like if it's around 4 to 5 kilometers away from the city center, then it's beneficial for the city as well. If it's like go into the city center, then it doesn't make any changes. If it's away from the city center, then people can park their car there, and then use other modes of transportation.
Nikhil and then Krashnik.
Yeah. I would like to be a little selfish and ask 2 questions actually. The first
Oh,
one
no.
is the first one is like I knew that you had a very interesting workshop where you actually did have bus traffic, somebody from bus traffic, and then you had also a residential parking company, right? So I'm just curious how the interaction was between them, and you sort of showed them the results and you showed them the data that people are actually interested in this. So if you could elaborate a little bit on that, how that interaction went and what feedback you got from them. And the second question was something I forgot, but I'll come back.
I'll answer this first, and then you can
Yeah.
think about the second question. So when I first met the stakeholder from building company, he was really interested in the concept. In fact, he said that they are planning to implement this shared parking in their future buildings. But right now, he said that there's quite opposition from the tenants because he said that the parking space currently there it's been looked as a personal asset from the tenant side, so it's difficult for them to change their behavior and share it with someone else. And also from public transportation perspective, uh, they are actually planning to collaborate with the public parking company and have some similar sort of digital application. But providing incentives is quite challenging for them because it's it's not in their existing business model. They have to modify it and get a permission from their management. So it's difficult to convince them as well. And it also important from their perspective to analyze how much discount should be available. Because if there's a lot of discount, then people would drive their car to this parking space and then catch a public transport from there. They just cannot provide discounts for everyone, or they cannot even provide discounts only for this particular segment.
Right.
So it's quite complicated from their perspective. But there are quite practical problems which we don't know because there is a lot of lack of research. But once, if anyone thinks about a pilot study, in the workshop, the stakeholder from our building company, he was interested in a pilot study.
Yeah.
So that could give much clear results about how to frame the whole business model.
Rashnik and Villa, and if you can.
Yeah, I'm back to it. Yeah.
Did you come?
Yeah.
Remember the question? Go for that one and then.
Okay, yeah, because it's related to what you said, and then you said, yeah, you kind of need to see how the concept works in the field.
Yeah.
And I guess you're also in touch with somebody who's working in Stockholm, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, what was the feedback from them? Like what worked and what didn't work in Stockholm, and do you think it could work here in Gothenburg?
There's a lot of difference between Stockholm and here because it's a huge city,
Yeah.
as you all know, and there's a lot of people who use car over there. So since it's a huge city and there are people and the business centers are in the center, in the city center as well as in the outside of the city. So there's a lot of movement. And he said that it's quite successful over there, and he sees quite a lot of potential in future as well.
Okay.
But here in Gothenburg perspective, it's quite tricky because uh, the city is not huge, and even the number of people are not high enough when compared to the metropolitan city. So it needs a quite different business model here, and also the integration with bus traffic would be much better for them.
Yeah. Thank you.
But they are planning to implement here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Rashnik and Villa.
So I think we are many in this room that are very impressed by you, just for the sake of taking on this challenge of writing a thesis all by yourself, and then actually come up with this good proposal. I, as a friend, am very proud of this. And as a friend, I feel it's also my duty to give you some feedback on some things you can think about, since the report is not finalized. So there's two things that I was thinking about, and one is that you should look at the case, what happened when they introduced the congestion charges in Gothenburg, because what they did was that they opened up free parking in Bielsjön. This was meant for all the people coming from east of Gothenburg to park their car in Bielsjön and then take the public transport with us. But I can't say for sure, but I think it was a huge failure. I think people didn't care about that last mile. If they worked in the city center, then they would take bus 100 all the way there.
Yeah.
So that could be a case to look at if you have time or so. And with that related, if it would work in the theory that okay, I will just take it to the outskirts of the center and then take the bus, then I still have to pay the bus ticket, which is somewhat related to your discussion. So I would say have these things in mind. Maybe mention this in the report that the behaviors are difficult to change and all that. And then what I wanted to end up with is I still think it's a good idea. There's still people who they don't want to change their behavior, and they want to take the car all the way to the store and all that. So I would say drop the municipality and go for opening your own app, much like Airbnb with the parking spot. But I genuinely think this could be something, and let people who want a parking space in the middle of the center get one.
Yeah, like as I showed in one of the pie chart, 50% of the respondents they agreed to park their car in one of the shared space. So if I provide like more information to them, like we can add like more people to this group.
just look at Airbnb as a model,
Yeah.
and I think you will find your way.
Good. Ville?
Yeah, my question actually connects with a bit that. And yeah, first of all, thanks for the presentation. I think the topic is interesting, and yeah, we have had talks about the topic during the year. But one thing that comes in my mind, like, who owns the customer here? Like, it connects a little bit to misalignment that we found out. Like, is it the public transportation then who is owning the customer here, and this service is kind of embedded in that, or is it like a third-party company who is the public transportation is kind of supplier to them? Then, or is it is there different scenarios, or
Yeah. Like it's tricky to look into like who's going to take the responsibility of providing the service. It could be either a third party, like the existing shared parking companies. They are like third party providers. Uh, but in one of the workshop, in the workshop which I conducted, the public parking company, they said that they are interested in this concept if they think it's feasible in future, and if they want to include the residential parking spaces, then it could expand their business, and they can take the responsibility as well, since they already are in talk with Bus Traffic to integrate their tickets in their existing parking portal. So I don't think they need to modify much into their existing portal to include the residential parking as well. Even they can take the responsibility, but again, yeah, it depends on how they uh, provide value for other stakeholders who are involved in the supply chain. It depends on that.
Good. Any final questions? Good, Ville, you get the follow-up.
can I go?
Yeah.
Yes. So after your workshop, we talked about connected vehicles and as they are coming. And then we had like a little bit brainstorming, like how would that impact this concept? Do you have any, did you elaborate the thought anywhere after that, or do you have any ideas like how if the vehicle itself would be connected, how it would it make this easier, more efficient, cheaper to come up with, or?
Yeah, uh, it seems like super interesting because when the vehicles and the parking are connected, it's easier for them to get into the parking space without much hassle. But it depends on how the future transportation would design, and when we don't know when the automated vehicles would be commercialized, and when and that kind of future is uncertain. And even the shade parking perspective, we don't know if this will be commercialized in future, even though there are like a couple of companies working on that. So that kind of integration would be interesting to see in future. But I'm not I'm not including that in my work.
Thank you very much. I can just speak for myself as well. I would like to be able to drive to Backaplan and change to the tram over there. That would be good for Kreshnik as well, since I almost ran him over during the winter when I was driving here to work. So it would be good for everyone if I don't have to drive.
From here.
Yeah. So
Road rage is a dangerous thing.
It wasn't road rage. It was.
Damn
Anyhow,
students.
so, Adarsh, thank you very much. And to all our guests, thank you very much for joining. Kai, you've been listening in all day. I really like that. Gunilla as well, thank you for joining in. Tomorrow the presentations will continue. 8:30 tomorrow we start with the final 3 presentations. And now it's time for a 10-minute break. And then us in the lab, we will have a final checkout after that. Thank you.
Oh crap, it's checked.